He's gone from being someone you never heard of to someone who's at the top of the polls in the presidential race. Is Herman Cain looking for support from evangelical Christians like us? This is the CitizenLink Report. I'm Stuart Shepard along with Tom Minnery, my friend and colleague, and also the executive director of CitizenLink. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Stuart.
Let's talk about Herman Cain a bit. What is it that pushed him all the way to the top of a poll this week?
He is connecting with people on many levels. He speaks exuberantly, he speaks excitedly, he's optimistic, and he's got a faith base to him that's obvious to a lot of people, particularly those in the first encounters, which will be Iowa and South Carolina. That's important in the early running to somebody who's trying to get Republican votes in a primary, or in Iowa's case, the caucuses.
For many years now, we've gotten used to the idea that anytime a conservative candidate shows up on one of the Sunday morning talk shows, they end up being a little defensive, perhaps. Is that a fair statement? Herman Cain went on Meet the Press this weekend. He was not defensive at all. He just laid out, this is exactly what I believe. Let's take a look at what he said to David Gregory.
Same-sex marriage. Would you seek a constitutional ban for same-sex marriage?
I wouldn't seek a constitutional ban for same-sex marriage, but I am pro-traditional marriage.
But you would let the states make up their own mind as they're doing now?
They would make up their own minds, yes.
What about abortion? You want to overturn Roe v. Wade. Could you support or condone abortion under any exceptions at all?
I believe in life from conception, and I do not agree with abortion under any circumstances.
Exceptions for rape and incest?
Not for rape and incest.
What about life of the mother?
Because if you look at rape and incest, the percentage of those instances is so minuscule that the other option, if it's the life of the mother, that family is going to have to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Tom, that's pretty strong.
It is pretty straightforward, although we would disagree with him on the question of a federal marriage amendment. We support a federal marriage amendment, the idea that there is one definition of marriage regardless of what state you travel through. And so we don't agree with him there. We certainly agree with him on the question of abortion being illegal. Now, he does what most politicians are afraid to do, which is wade right into the exception on rape and incest. He does not support exceptions for rape and incest, and he's as strong as that on that as is Senator Rick Santorum. To have two candidates take that absolute view on the subject of abortion is highly unusual and most welcome.
Now, it's interesting to me. That's the typical Sunday morning program. You expect those kind of questions. He also showed up on The View with Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar and Elizabeth Hasselbeck and all that, and had the same kind of non-apologetic, straightforward presentation. This is what I think. And they looked a little put off. Put off is the right word. Thrown off, I think, is the right word. They weren't sure how to handle someone who was that confidently conservative from his viewpoint.
See, Stuart, I think the key word is confidently. A lot of politicians seem to think they're on thin ice when they get onto the subject of abortion. A lot of political people ought to take a lesson from someone such as Herman Cain and from Rick Santorum. When you enter one of these moral debates, do so confidently with deep resolve, and you'll get through it a lot better than if you hem and haw and seem to be bobbing and weaving.
Now, you've been reading up a bit on Herman Cain, his background, who he is. Help us understand a bit more about who this guy is.
Well, actually, I think he's someone who's got to his firm resolve on a lot of these issues because he's come through his own crisis. A few years ago, he had stage 4 colon cancer. Now, that is very serious. He's survived that, and he believes that he has done so for a purpose. He has said, I believe it is God's will for my life to run for office, or run for president. Now, people who are not familiar with the way Christians say things like that might be off-put by somebody who talks about God's will. You know, I recall back to the Blues Brothers movie, We're on a Mission from God, kind of making fun of that concept. But all it means is that evangelicals have a God whose will guides their life, and it's nothing for non-Christians to be upset about. It's just the way we like to speak about spiritual matters. Yeah. He is a theologically conservative politician, obviously. His church is the National Black Convention, as we've said before. That is a theologically conservative denomination, the largest traditional American black denomination. Political liberalism runs through that because it is so steeped in the civil rights movement. And so There have been some surprising guest speakers in Antioch Baptist Church North in Atlanta, where Herman Cain is an associate pastor. People such as Malcolm X, I believe, have spoken there, and other heroes of the, not that Malcolm X is a hero of the civil rights movement, but there have been civil rights movement heroes speaking there. And that is something that white evangelicals need to get used to, theological conservatism with some strains of political liberalism, as black Americans have traditionally looked to government for more solutions. So it's a strange perplexity here. Now, Herman Cain, though, he draws from the Gospels for his conservatism. Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, is one that he likes to cite. He regards the parable of the talents as one that supports conservatism. In fact, he called Jesus the perfect conservative. If you recall the parable of the talents, a taskmaster was going away and gave 3 servants talents to use, money, gold to use, to invest. One got 10 talents, one got 5 talents, one got only 1 talent. Those who, when the master came back, those who got 10 talents and 5 talents invested that money and gained more. The one who was entrusted only with 1 talent buried that treasure, didn't invest it, was afraid to lose it. Now Herman Cain draws this lesson from that. Jesus did not say, when you spend the talent, I'll give you more. He was happy when they invested it and created more wealth. That is what he draws from that parable. And he also likens himself a bit to the prophet Jeremiah, who was reluctant to speak to his people when things were going wrong. But eventually Jeremiah did preach to the people. And he said, I liken myself to Jeremiah. I have watched the Obama administration do the wrong things. I've watched so many of the people get thrown out of work, and I feel like I've got common sense solutions that are biblically based, and I want to put them into the public conversation, which is why he ran for president. Now, he regards himself as trying to be Christ-like every day, trying to get better and better. I mean, his mode is theological evangelicalism, to be sure, and so that's why I think his stock is rising in the early going here before the first contests come.
Now, as you look across the field of candidates, where does that put him as far as evangelicals try to make a decision on which candidate to support? Where does that place him in this broad spectrum of candidates? We got 8 people running. How do you pick one out of all that?
I don't think it's wise to try and pick a candidate based on who's more evangelical than another. I think one has to make his or her decision based on common sense solutions from a biblical worldview that understands the reality of sin, the reality of industry and hard work, but by shaving evangelical Christianity very finely, I think people will get into trouble. For example, I believe in the coming weeks we're going to hear more reporting about this church in Atlanta, the Antioch Baptist Church North, because of the liberal people who've been in that pulpit. And I think there's going to be a strange parallelism with Reverend Jeremiah Wright and Barack Obama's church in Chicago. Jeremiah Wright preached things that President Obama claims not to believe. I believe there are people in that Antioch Baptist Church North in Atlanta who have preached things that Herman Cain does not believe. This is Herman Cain's home church. His parents were stalwart members there, and there's an acceptance there. But I think Herman Cain is someone who is firm in his evangelical beliefs. I would say one thing, however. He has said it is wrong for Muslims to try and convert people to their way of life, their religious views in this country. He says it's wrong for American Muslims to try to convert others. He needs to be careful there because evangelicals believe in good news. We want to convert others to our views. We never do it forcibly. Obviously, if people reject the good news, they have free will to do that, but we want to reserve the right to at least make the case. And if Herman Cain says it's wrong for Muslims to try and do that under any circumstances, and he seems to be flatly against it, I think he's on thin ice there.
All right. Anything else you'd like to share before we move on?
It's going to be interesting. It shows again the importance of religious faith in American politics. Those on the left would like it to be boxed into the four walls of a church and honored only on Sunday mornings, but it is not. It is everywhere. It is flourishing in today's political picture as it has always been.
He talked about, I was in the room at the Values Voters Summit when Herman Cain spoke, and it was the most attended session of the entire summit as far as the ones that I was at. The room was, they had more seats set up than usual because they had more than 3,000 people who registered. So the room had more seating. Those were all full, and then people were stacked up in the back 5 and 6 deep, literally standing room only. One of the stories he shared was, he says, people ask about, his experience in America as a black American, as he calls himself. And he said, I was there during the Jim Crow law days, and I was there during the Civil Rights Movement, and there during the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and he talks about his childhood with his parents of humble beginnings. And he mentioned a comment by a reporter who said, "Aren't you angry at the way America has treated you?" And his response was, you have to hear it in his big booming voice, he said, "You don't get it, do you?" He said basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's a pretty close quote, "I've achieved every dream I ever imagined and then some because of the United States of America." And of course that brought the room to its feet. Huge round of applause for that particular line. He knows how to light up a room.
Well, the reason a statement like that lights up the room is because to hear a black man say that, and incidentally, he doesn't accept well the title of African American. He says, "I'm an American black conservative." And to hear somebody like that say what you just said he said is a threat to the black community that is steeped in liberal politics, because victimhood plays a large role in that, and he's rejecting that. So he stands against the strain of black politics that we're more accustomed to.
All right. Hey, we got a lot of mail last week. I did a special report from the Values Voters Summit, and I made a decision. We have to make editorial decisions as we go through. We featured 4 of the speakers at the event out of 7 who were there. Some folks wrote to offer their thanks that we played a couple of minutes of those speeches, tried to be fair about that and divvy it up among the ones we shared, and said thank you for letting us hear it, because so often on the news it gets focused on gotcha instead of what they're actually saying. We wanted to share that. Others, however, took issue with the choices that we made. We heard from some supporters of Michelle Bachmann who said, quote, "I can't believe it. I read your report on the Values Voters Summit speakers and found it sadly lacking, totally inadequate, blatantly biased and manipulative. Where was the report of Michelle Bachmann's speech? You should be ashamed." And it goes on from there. And obviously we made an editorial decision. It's open to critique. We are not opposed to Michelle Bachmann's run for the presidency. And in fact, we've talked about her on this program. I did a stoplight video about her last year sometime, or last spring actually, to talk about her. And we will undoubtedly, if she continues in the race here, talk about her in the future. We also heard from some Ron Paul supporters. "I was shocked," all caps, "that you would completely," all caps, "ignore in your video the winner of this year's Values Voters Summit." That was Ron Paul, as if we didn't know that. I mean, we're aware of that. Instead, you focused only on Santorum, which is not true. Perry, Cain, and Romney. That is true. I'm sorry. Ron Paul is playing. It goes on and on. I was in the room when Ron Paul spoke, and I can share a couple of insights there. It's interesting. He did win the straw poll at the Values Voters Summit, but all accounts are that he, seeing that they opened it up to anyone who registered, on Saturday morning when he spoke, they brought in hundreds of Ron Paul supporters who registered, paid their dues, went in to watch Ron Paul speak, and then stood in line for the straw poll and then left. They didn't listen to any of the other speeches. They weren't really there for the conference. They were there for Ron Paul. And I was in the room when Paul spoke, and the folks who are Ron Paul supporters were quite evident. They're loud. They're having a good time. It's kind of a party atmosphere as they cheer him on. But it was not the whole room that was supporting him. You could tell that it was a section of the room where these folks had gathered together, and then, like I mentioned, they skipped out again. Perhaps the most telling thing about the straw poll was who came in second, and that was the man we were just talking about, Herman Cain, who was then, the whole room was cheering for him and supporting him. Did Ron Paul do anything wrong? I don't think so. I think it was a problem perhaps with the way the straw poll was set up. I mean, it was open to. His supporters saw what the rules were, followed those rules, signed up and voted. So, he won the straw poll, but I don't think it was a real clear indication of the event and where the sense of the event was.
Yeah, and one more thing. One of the things we try and do here is to talk about what people are thinking about, people who are making news. And if Michelle Bachmann were to rise again in the polls, we would certainly turn our attention to her. Or if Ron Paul would rise again in the polls, or again, I mean, I don't think he's ever been terribly high, but if he would become a phenomenon, such as is Herman Cain, we would talk about him as well. So we react on who seems to be making news.
Yeah, and it's not our job to raise them up. We're just here to talk about those who have captured the thoughts of folks across the country and have gotten that. Now, also, just to be transparent, our intent was, in that video that we ran last week, and also with the articles that we ran, was to put a link to all of the speeches of all of the folks who spoke at the event. I obviously couldn't be at every speech and make everything because I had a lot of things going on. But as of when we released our video, they still had not posted all of those, so we were not able to put that link on there as we intended to. Once that link becomes available to all the speeches, we will definitely include that in the CitizenLink email and on the website, because we want you to be able to compare all of the candidates and make the best decision that you can.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching. Remember, stand tall and be heard.